Assalamu alaikum, Nour. Jazakallah khair for coming on to the show.
Wa iyaki, it's my pleasure.
Alhamdulillah. So before we begin, could I ask you to just maybe explain a little bit about yourself and yeah, and what you do in America?
Sure. So the first thing I like to tell people, first and foremost, is that I am not a scholar. I am not an ustaza, and I don't even identify as an activist. I'm just an ordinary Muslim sister who is grappling with a lot of the issues that other Muslim sisters are grappling with. And to the extent that I can share what I'm learning, I'm happy to do so. Um, I guess you could say I have started to gain somewhat of a public platform when I began my podcast back in 2015. It no longer exists, but there I tried to have conversations with Muslims and Arabs within the United States and Canada about a lot of these taboo topics, one of them being feminism. Um, and for anyone who's interested in learning more about my background and what I've been doing, they can go to my website and read up there.
What's the name of your website?
It's nourmgoda.com.
Okay.
nourmgoda.com. By trade, I'm a teacher. I have taught middle and high school for the last 10 years. I was an administrator as well, and I have a background in Montessori. And in my spare time, like I said, I'm reading and researching and writing about these issues. And for whatever reason, I'm often asked to discuss my views and understanding of feminism as it relates to Muslim women.
Mhm. Well, that's how I came across you, that I was doing research. I wanted to educate myself on the topic of feminism and how it relates to Islam. And I must admit, it was a little bit hard to find um, someone who could explain what feminism was in a nice, easy to understand and practical way. So that's why I wanted to have you as a guest, so you could share your knowledge and experience with the listeners. So if you, I guess the first question would be that how would you explain feminism in society today?
Sure. Well, Jazakallahu khairan for having faith in my ability to do so. I will do my best. It's not always easy to explain because this is such a dense and complex topic. Um, the reality is that there is no one agreed upon definition of feminism, even among feminists themselves. Depending on which feminist you're talking to, they will give you their, taste of what feminism means to them. And in large part, that's because there have been different waves of feminism throughout the last century. But the sort of generally agreed upon broad statement is that it is the movement for equal rights for women. That is the most, generally agreed upon definition that I have found. And for the sake of this podcast, I just want to sort of orient the audience to how we're going to go about this conversation. I know that there are very urgent questions that sisters are eager to ask, like, why are there gender roles in Islam? Why do men have more power? Why do I have to answer to my husband? All of these sort of more pragmatic questions. And inshallah, we will get to those questions. But in order to effectively have a conversation relating to those questions, we really need to flesh out the history of how we got here. We really need to understand sort of the framework that we're operating within in order to answer these questions. So while feminism has its slogans and its catchphrases and its, one sentence answers to everything, which in my opinion is very much a sign of hubris, I don't have those one statement answers. And that's because Islam doesn't have those answers in the way that we have been trained to digest those kinds of answers.
Mm-hmm.
The Quran and the Hadith give us a worldview, a complete system for how to live harmoniously and peacefully and how to attain justice on earth. And we always have to go back to this idea that we cannot cherry pick instances and grievances and say, this is just or unjust. We have to look at it within the scope of the entire worldview, the entire framework, the why. Why does Allah decree the following for us? Why does it make sense that men have these duties and responsibilities and women have these duties and responsibilities? So I know that it's going to take a little bit longer for us to get to the questions, but inshallah, sisters and brothers will walk away with a somewhat more thorough understanding. Okay, so the first thing that I want us to understand is that we're going to talk about feminism based on the definition that we just agreed upon, that it is a movement to get equal rights for women. Okay? Now, we cannot take these words for granted. We cannot assume that we have the same understanding of what equal rights is. We can't even agree that women's rights is what we should be seeking in the first place. Because according to feminism in the Western world, the UK, the US, Canada, and other first world countries, women's rights means women being able to do whatever men do.
Mm-hmm.
Women's rights in Islam does not mesh with this definition. Okay, the way that God has decreed for women to attain their rights and what those rights are very different from what the West tells us is women's rights. And I'll be going back and forth between saying the West and the secular paradigm. And paradigm here just means worldview, the framework, the way that we perceive the world and what morality is and what immorality is. So the moment we begin to engage with this definition of feminism, we have agreed to adopt wholesale its history, its language, its terms, its definitions, its values, what it deems to be moral and what it deems immoral. And what we find is that oftentimes those sets of values they're not compatible with what Islam tells us our values should be. Does that make sense so far?
Yes, that so what you're saying is that feminism it's basically a godless idea. Yeah, it's not based on belief in God. So therefore straight away it's got a different foundation to Islam. So therefore, but we do need to understand what are the roots of feminism.
Yes, I'm saying that to an extent. So not every wave of feminism, I wouldn't say every wave of feminism was godless in its most superficial sense, because certainly first wave feminists would say that they are practicing Christians.
Okay.
But for our purposes today, where feminism looks more intersectional, and we can talk about what that means in a moment, and it is often conflated with the LGBTQ movement, you almost cannot separate feminism from that social justice movement.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think you could more easily make the argument that feminism does not answer to a higher power or a higher authority.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So one of the reasons why it doesn't make sense to call ourselves feminists as Muslims is because if you study the history of feminism and you study the works of Muslim women who identify as feminists, you see that they themselves are pointing out the incompatibility. And I'm trying not to get into mentioning specific names here, but many of the prominent Muslim feminists out there advocate for the rejection of hadith. They advocate for the rewriting or reinterpretation of the Quran. And so in that way, you're not actually proving that Islam and feminism are compatible. What you're saying is that they're incompatible. And what we need to do is we need to reform Islam.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? So that's the bottom line. That's the main problem right there. But historically speaking, feminism was not a movement that affected the Muslim world. It began in the 19th century, in the late 1800s, in Europe and in the United States, where women were fighting for the right to vote. Okay, and they were fighting for the right to have certain property rights. Mm-hmm. These are things that did not pertain to Muslim women. When the Quran came down, it made very clear what women's rights were as far as finances and economics within her marriage are concerned. It made very clear a woman's role in the private and in the public spheres, what's permissible and what's impermissible. And so as women in the West were fighting for their rights, we were not concerned with that
Mm-hmm.
because we very clearly understood where our responsibilities and our duties rested, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. It
Yeah.
isn't until the colonial era when a lot of these ideas, feminism being one of them, were imported into the Muslim world from European colonizers, that's when we began to, the process of confusion began there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then now, with many of us growing up in the West, that confusion has just become exponentially inflated. And so that's why I think so many sisters are confusing women's rights with feminism. We have to understand that feminism doesn't have a monopoly on women's rights. It is one
Yes.
way
Mm-hmm.
of perceiving the issues that exist today, where women are oftentimes, not always, and not all women, are oftentimes oppressed by men, not all men, some men. And Islam has its point of view, its worldview of how to rectify these injustices.
Mm-hmm. I think the issue we face in 2019 is that feminism is now marketed and conveyed to all women as it's a good thing, it's a solution to your problems, that you should positively identify as a feminist, that the ideas that are now connected to, like the feelings that are connected to feminism, words like it's empowering, it's positive, it's a good thing, and that to say you're not a feminist is now people seen as strange.
Yes.
So how has feminism managed to get such a good, I don't know how to put it, it's like propaganda that it's managed to convince everyone that it's a good thing?
Well, first and foremost, feminism is an offshoot of a worldview that it's an offshoot of the secular liberal worldview. So let's explain what that means. When we say secular, we're talking about the separation of technically church and state, right? That religion is something to be practiced in the privacy of one's home, and that it has no place in the public sphere, and that everybody has the equal right to practice their religion in the privacy of their home. When we're talking about liberalism, we're talking about ultimately in how it affects us today is this idea that everybody is right in their own truth, right? So you can believe what you want to believe, and that truth is equally as valid as somebody else's truth. In theory, it sounds nice, right? It sounds very equitable and equal, even. But
Hmm.
when it comes to practice, we're stepping on one another's toes. We find that it's a little bit muddier in that sense because um, you're going to run into the situation where at times one person's truth is going to contradict your truth, and then there is going to oftentimes be a violation of religious freedom or your ability to practice your faith in public. So if my truth as an atheist is that God doesn't exist and you should not be able to um impose that on me, I could see your public display of the hijab as a affront on my rights.
Mm-hmm.
And you, as a Muslim woman wearing hijab, could see my view as an atheist as an affront on your rights.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
secular liberalism tells us that everybody's truth is equally valid. um, Anything goes. It's very relativistic. It's very in the moment, in the here and now, and it's very individualistic. And it doesn't answer to any higher authority, right? It's the human being in his particular lifespan who decides what is moral and what is immoral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's the crux of it, isn't it? That if feminism comes from human beings, men and, well, here it's women mainly, who are deciding what's right, what is a woman's right. So when I think the way that you know it's a woman's right to abort the fetus if she does not want to have that baby, if it doesn't fit in with her life, she doesn't even actually have to give a reason anymore. And
Yeah.
straight away, as a Muslim woman, that contradicts our belief in when you can abort a child, a little fetus, So it's, I guess, as Muslim women, we really do need to, and that's the whole purpose of this discussion as well, is to dig a bit deeper beyond the slogans that we're given, beyond the quotes on Pinterest that we read that make us feel nice and make us sound that all us women, we're in it together. But in reality, it's not true.
We need to acknowledge sort of why Muslim sisters are hopping on the feminist bandwagon.
Yeah.
First and foremost, there are legitimate and valid grievances within the Muslim community, right? That women do face injustice and oppression in their lives. Not all women. Again, I have to stress this point, because if we're going to argue that it's all women facing injustice, that means it's all men inflicting injustice, and therefore there is a patriarchy, this system of men, who have designed a world in which they sit in positions of power, and render women completely powerless. But in Islam, we are taught that men have duties and responsibilities, women have duties and responsibilities. We are not taught that men have power and women have power. Power belongs to God. End of the day. Okay. And it is God who decides and has decided what our roles and our responsibilities are, and how we should avoid transgressing, those boundaries. But because we are human beings, we are not infallible. We're flawed. And we do see within the Muslim community instances of transgression. We do see instances of women being oppressed at the hands of men and women, not just men, right? And so in those instances, what are we doing? Are we turning to our Islamic tradition to guide us and to help us rectify the matter? Or are we turning to Western ideologies and worldviews like feminism to save us? In many ways, we're behaving like the groups that colonized us, that told us our way or their way of doing things is the more progressive and advanced and civilized way. And we are now saying to them, we need you. We need your ideologies. We need your worldviews. We need your methods and tools to save us from our oppressive Islam, That's what we're doing when we're turning to feminism. Even if we're saying we're feminists, even if we're calling ourselves Muslims and we wear hijab, if we don't understand our deen and we're not living it the way that Allah has decreed and the way the Prophet ﷺ has modeled for us, then we're falling short, and we're actually just turning to secular worldviews, godless worldviews, to help us in seeking justice. So I do empathize with our sisters who are looking for solutions for their everyday problems. What I want to encourage them to do is to hold these men and women accountable using the Quran and the Hadith. Always go back to Allah, because that is the only way that you are going to attain justice at all. It is not through looking, to other men and women to help you to do that, because they themselves are fallible.
Yeah. And it makes me think that when, like, for example, what you've just said is that our solution to our problems as women or as men goes back to returning to Quran and Sunnah. However, what we're told by feminists and even prominent Muslim feminists is that if we work for equality in society, so whether it's through political representation, so in the UK, for example, we had Theresa May as the Prime Minister. So she reached the top. So you could say, she reached it. Even in Pakistan, when Benazir Bhutto, this is a while ago, she became Prime Minister. You had Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh. We've had female leaders in the world, in many different countries.
Right.
And I haven't seen that the situation of the women, okay, I'm from Pakistan, so I know in particular about when Benazir Bhutto was in charge, she was as corrupt as every other previous Muslim leader of Pakistan. If not, she embezzled the country and then left. And then her husband became Prime Minister. He did it as well. So this idea, based on just facts and reality, getting women in power doesn't make the life of women better.
Precisely. it's the false notion, the false claim, which we have, you know, come to accept, that based on our shared biology, based on our shared sex or our, you know, shared race or whatever, not that race is biological, but based on these characteristics, that we can seek justice. I mean, President Obama held
Yes.
office for 2 terms, and what happened afterwards? The Black
Mm.
Lives Matter movement, you
Yes.
know, exploded. So it is not necessarily the case that more representation will lead to justice. What will lead to justice is having a very clear compass and a very clear vision of what society, a healthy society looks like. And that's what we find in the Quran. And that is what we find through the lived example of the Prophet alayhi salam.
Hmm.
So when we have those two things as our, you know, zenith, as our guiding star, then we have a very clear view of what we should be working towards. That isn't based on random, you know, random things like our shared biology or the fact that we are of the same race or the same socioeconomic background. Because human beings are fallible. We know this. We know that we are susceptible to corruption.
Hmm. Hmm. So it's interesting. And on your website, there, your one of your most recent articles was it was titled "Raise Your Gaze: The Modest Fashion Industry and Muslims' Desperation for Mainstream Representation." Now, could you, inshallah, encourage everyone to go and read the article? It's I'll put a link in the description. Um, but what made you feel the need to write that article?
Sure. So that post on my website is actually an excerpt of a longer monograph that I'm working on, and inshallah, it'll be done soon, and I'll have it up there. But it's about the modest fashion industry as a whole. And what inspired me is really this the pop culture of you know, hijabis and hijabi fashionistas and bloggers and bloggers and seeing the hijab being commodified and sexualized and politicized in our era, in large part by millennials and centennials. And so I started to think a lot about this. It's taken me 2 or 3 years to really digest what's been going on. And I've been trying to stay up to date on the news and the happenings. And one of the things that I try to do in this essay is to demonstrate how the hijab has been stripped of its religious roots and what it has been replaced by. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, what I have shared so far is the way that it's been commodified and how the entire industry breeds exorbitant consumerism, in
Hmm.
that we are encouraged to take part in, you know, our capitalist society that tells us to spend, 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 spend. And as Muslims, I don't hear us talking enough about why this is problematic, why this is un-Islamic.
Yes, yes.
That it's, I mean, yesterday I was at the mall with my husband and I walked into Sephora, and I'm not joking, 9 out of 10 women in there were sisters in hijab.
Oh, okay.
You know, I mean, I am in Northern Virginia and there are a lot of Muslims here, but nevertheless, there's just this culture of Muslim
Sorry,
women.
sorry, what kind of shop is Sephora? I don't think I've
Oh,
heard
it's a
of.
makeup. It's a
Oh, it's
makeup.
makeup. Okay, right.
Yes, yes. And, you know,
Mm,
it's just, it's everywhere. And if you sit down with a young Muslim sister, most likely you will find that they're aware of who the stars of the hijab fashion world are, who
yes.
the sisters on YouTube are, on Instagram. They're
Yeah.
celebrities. They're they're treated like celebrities, and they're role models. More importantly, they're taken for role models by younger Muslim girls.
Yeah. It's interesting that I don't know how long you've been when you started covering, but again, I've okay, it's been maybe 20 odd years for me. And the evolution of hijab and the way is just you know, 2 years ago, 3 years, it really started shocking me what I was seeing. And I
Mm.
think this is like, I didn't know how to, I just couldn't understand. I was kept thinking, why are they not wearing it properly? Why is it so, it's becoming, like you said, very provocative and very sexualized. And now it's, you know, that you know, it's there really, it's not hair. And I just thought, why would anyone go to so much trouble to even bother wearing it? And the thing is, and I know so many mums my age who have teenage girls, they just don't know what to do. They don't know what, some have just given up. They'll end up thinking, well, at least she's not wearing a mini skirt. That's what ends up happening. It's like the lesser of the two evils, that,
Right.
you know, at least she's not, you know, she may be wearing you know, full face of makeup, but at least she, you know, at least she, you know, she might be wearing skin tight jeans, at least she's wearing jeans, you know.
Yeah.
um
Unfortunately, this is, like I said, I'm writing a monograph on this. It's going
mm.
on 30 something pages now. So it's way more dense than I can get into here. But
Yeah.
um, you are right to bring up this topic in a conversation on feminism, because
Yes.
it definitely is influenced by the movement that says my body, my choice, my hijab, my choice. You know, the movement that says I'm an independent woman, I don't need a man. That, you know, just all of these slogans, all the slogans
Mm.
that we've grown accustomed to hearing when we think about women's power and women's empowerment.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as what we can do as mothers for the sake of our daughters, there are a few things, all under the following umbrella. I think we need to create the conditions that will ensure our daughters are proud to be Muslim, because what I sincerely believe and what I sincerely am seeing is weakness in falling prey to the non-Muslim worldview, in large part because we have low self-esteem about our Islamic identity.
Hmm.
We have imbibed, we have soaked up the media's portrayals of Muslims as antiquated, outmoded, barbaric, uncivilized, stuck in the past, very traditional, misogynistic, etc. You know, the list goes on. Not only do non-Muslims see Muslims this way, Muslims themselves see themselves this way.
Hmm.
So how can we be shocked then if young Muslim girls are wearing hijab the way that they are?
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, that is just symptomatic of a deeper issue. The deeper issue being that we don't understand our deen, we don't know it, and we understand Western ideas way more than we understand the Quran and the Islamic tradition. And we are way better versed to defend ideas like feminism, right, than we are to discuss any ayah of the Quran or any hadith. And so, because of those reasons, we find ourselves on the outside modeling and mimicking and behaving in ways that are palatable and digestible to the secular non Muslim in our society. Now, why wear the hijab at all, right? If we are so ashamed of our Islamic background. Well,
Hmm.
because right now we live in a time in which Muslims and the Muslim identity, as we will call it, is being praised by, in large part, the feminist LGBTQ secular liberal worldview that says everybody is equal. Everybody is, you know, important. Now, on the surface, that is true and that is valid. The problem is that I'm trying to figure out how to break this down in simple terms. The dilemma here is, again, the relativist approach that says anything goes, everything goes. If I'm going to accept you as a Muslim, you have to accept me as a gay man, you have to accept me as a feminist, etc., etc. And so there's the compromise there. And by accept, we don't just mean tolerance and treating people as equal human beings, which you should do anyway as a Muslim. We're saying you need to support and advocate for these things that necessarily go against your faith,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So again, we need to create the conditions that are going to ensure that our children are proud to be Muslims. That's a two-pronged approach. The first thing that we need to do as parents is we need to take pride in our faith first and foremost. It came as a shock to me to find that many Muslim moms and dads are themselves saying things that perpetuate this very skewed and very denigrating view of Islam and Muslims. They themselves oftentimes are not really that proud to be Muslims. And so, whether we realize it or not, our children pick up on these things in our day to day lives. So, let's begin with ourselves. In another sense, we also, I think, as parents, even when we are proud of our Muslim background and proud of being born Muslims, we're not always consistently modeling what a Muslim should behave as. We're not modeling the Prophet's example. We sometimes impose our cultural norms, be they Arab, Pakistani, whatever. We impose cultural norms that Islam rejects, and then we call it Islam, and we backbite and we go through the motions of praying and fasting and giving zakat. But when it comes to how we speak to each other, when it comes to our shared humanity, when it comes to showing empathy and patience and respect, we fall short. We fall severely short. And we leave people feeling like, well, I don't want Islam. If that's
Mm.
Islam, look at the most pious, Muslim woman in my community. She's gossiping all the time about other sisters. I don't want Islam if that's supposed to be a righteous Muslim woman. Um, so we're negatively modeling Islam.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
of course, when it comes to feminism, how many of us Muslim mothers are asking ourselves, are we proud to be mothers and wives, stay at home moms? Many of us have internalized these ideas that, oh, well, we're just wives. We are just moms. Those are not really important roles. So if we believe that, if we're feeling that way, why would we expect our daughters to think or feel anything else outside of that? So those are things that we first need to get right with before we can do anything for our children. Once we've done that, then I think we need to educate ourselves as the leaders of the education and the rearing of our children. What are our daughters learning in school? Who
Mm.
are they surrounded by most of the day? Who are their peers? And who are their teachers and mentors? I don't know what your experience, Farhat, has been, but I've been shocked as a teacher to see sometimes the conversations that transpire between teachers and students and the things that they say to them,
Yes.
during the lunch break or, before class begins or after class is over. It's like you're not their parent and you're telling them things, you're advocating for things that their parent would not be happy with.
Yeah.
Um, so we need to know who our children are being educated by. We also need to keep them close. We need to be paying attention to them at all times. That means, once again, we need to get off of our phones, we need to turn off the TV, and we need to engage with our children. Ask yourself, keep a journal throughout the day. How much time do you spend cleaning the home, cooking, talking on the phone with your sister, with your friends, flipping through social media, spending time on your career, whatever it is? How much time do you spend doing that versus sitting down with your child while she is on the computer? Sitting down with your child over a cup of tea and having a conversation with her about school, about her friends, about what's on her mind. We need to be our children's friends so that they take us for friends as opposed to the peers outside. And when I say that, I don't mean, we need to be friends with them in the sense that, um, we should bend our rules and
Mhm, mhm.
submit our authority. But we need to develop loyalty with our children. We need to hang on to them because when they feel connected to us, their loyalty rests with us. When they feel more connected to their friends, their loyalty will rest with their friends. And that's just the way that it is because the human condition is such that we need to connect. We need to feel connected to others. So we have to step in and play more active, proactive roles as parents and stop seeing our duty as merely putting food on the table and sheltering them and taking them to the masjid on the weekends so that they learn Quran. Those are all important things, but the free time throughout the day is being ignored, and I think that's where the loopholes are and where children are getting away from us.
Mm-hmm. Jazakallah khair. I think you just spoke so much sense there, and I really hope that everyone listening, that I think that advice, having had, I've got 3 teenage kids, 2 boys and a girl, and
Mashallah.
it's um especially with your daughters, like what happens once you become a parent, once your kids become teenagers, it's so easy to just criticize them. And that could be maybe because the way you were raised, the way we were raised, that our parents criticized us a lot. Okay, that's fine, that happened. But the point is, when we see them doing something wrong, in the same, if when I do something wrong, do I want to just be shouted at? Do I want to be told off? Or
Mhm.
if someone sits me down and talks to me about it, I'm like you said, we don't change Islam to make them happy and make them think we're cool, because that's just point. That's what teachers try to be. They try to be cool.
That's right.
There'd always be those cool teachers who would
Mhm.
let them eat food in their classroom and be on their phone, and that used
I,
to bug
I
me.
let my students eat.
Oh, you know what the thing is, I think UK schools. Well, in UK schools, they all have to wear uniform. They don't wear uniform in high school. I think in UK it's just a little bit. They've got more rules.
Mm.
However, so going back to what I was saying, that yeah, spending time with your children, it's I know parents find it hard, and our teenage teens can be so stroppy and so mouthy and so ungrateful, and we think, I just can't, I haven't got the energy for this. But then we can't complain when they don't wear their hijab properly. We can't complain when they
Right,
don't want to follow Islam. If we
right.
again, but then alhamdulillah, the upside is the reward. Allah says our the amount of reward we get for doing, like, for example, about the reward for just staying up at night to feed your baby. I'm
Hmm.
sure you've probably read that recently again. And I read it again recently. I thought, oh wow, I forgot about that.
Right.
So we have to focus on the rewards that we will get for doing this hard work in the next life. I think if we keep our eyes on the goal, which is Jannah, it then becomes easier. And
Right.
doing lots of dua, with our actions.
Certainly. And that is all very, very true. However, I think when we think in terms of just child development, for the younger Muslim, that that doesn't resonate as much, right? Our akhirah and Jannah. So how do we get the youngsters
Oh,
to
yeah.
buy in and
Hmm.
to want to follow our example? Well,
Mm.
as a teacher, I'm sure you know this, but for the sake of our audience who may not, we have to make sure that we are incentivizing along the way. There are rewards that are age appropriate, as you go along. What motivates and inspires a teenager is not what motivates and inspires, a toddler, obviously. Um, so we have to constantly change and reflect on our parenting style, right, as
Mm.
our children grow up. But ultimately, it always comes back to this. If your child feels connected to you, and this begins at a very early age, from birth, truly. If your child feels connected to you and loved by you and um, really turns to you first before they turn to anybody else, they will grow up developing a loyalty to you that at first will be blind loyalty, right? Like your infant has this blind loyalty to you because you're his food source, right? He's got to love you. You're his food source. And as they develop, you become the person, they understand that you're the person that bathes them, feeds them, shelters them. So there's, that added layer of loyalty. Once they're teenagers and their minds can understand on more abstract levels, they develop the understanding that you want what's best for them, what's healthiest for them. And they don't need, stickers and so much verbal praise
Yeah.
necessarily. Although I don't know, maybe verbal praise is something that we never grow out of. But the point being, once again, is that they have to develop a sense of loyalty to you. When that happens, your child is less likely to lie to you, go behind your back, or disappoint you. Even
Mhm.
if at, let's say, age 11 or 12, it's simply because they don't want to offend you. They don't want to hurt your feelings. You're the most real thing to them. They may not have that sense of taqwa yet because developmentally they're not there. And that's okay. You know, that's okay. We can't expect 10-year-olds to necessarily understand the transcendent in the way that a, 25-year-old does. But
Mm-hmm.
we're getting there. We're building the foundation for getting there. That way, once they're in college and they are, let's say, or of college age, and they're struck with these philosophies and these ideas that make them question Islam, they will think twice about the person who, taught them these values. Did this person mean harm? Did this person mean to harm me? The person who taught me about God and about, Islam? At least they'll start there, right? And not start with, as many sisters today, who are turning to feminism. Well, I inherited Islam from this ruthless tyrant of a mother who I was not connected to, and an abusive father who, slapped my mom around night and day.
Mm-hmm.
What are the
Mm-hmm.
examples
Yeah.
that they're seeing, right? First and foremost. And unfortunately, this is oftentimes what a lot of ex-Muslims articulate. When you sit long enough with them, you realize, okay, you grew up in a household or in an environment that, modeled a disconnect between human beings. It wasn't a very functional and healthy home to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the point again that I'm trying to make here is that we need to hold on to our children. We need to dedicate ourselves. And so let's come full circle. Is the mother's role in the private sphere powerless and unimportant?
Yeah. No, it's not. Yeah.
You have the hardest job, the most
Yes.
important job.
Mm.
Men are raised by women. Men get to go out into the public sphere and sustain society, sustain the ummah, sustain the community, primarily because the women are doing what they're supposed to do in the home. They're developing healthy, rational, and healthy emotional human beings who can go out into the world and make sure that it remains a harmonious and just place. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
this is the ideal. We're
Mm.
talking about the ideal here.
Yes. Yes, that's right. Well, Jazakallah khair, Nour. It has been so nice to speak to you, and Jazakallah khair for taking the time to share, your knowledge and experience. Inshallah, may Allah reward you for your good intentions and your work. Inshallah, please, could you tell us again your website where sisters can read your
Sure,
articles?
sure. It's my name. It's Nour, NOURMGODA.com.
Okay, then great. Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, I hope you have a lovely day for the rest of